All right. Well, today on the show, we are excited to have Jay Kim with us. Jay, how are you today?
Great. How are you?
Doing really good, man. Doing really good. Hey, Jay, we are so excited to have you here on the podcast today. So, Jay, you wrote the book, The Analog Church, and I would love to hear what you saw that kind of spurred you into the process of writing. What was it that you saw happening in the church that said, "Hey, this is something I need to write about"?
Sure. That's a great question. I've spent probably, almost my entire life. I wasn't born here, but moved here when I was really young. Here being the Silicon Valley, which is the epicenter, the hub of digital technology. I can drive to the main campus of Apple in like 10 minutes from my front door, main campus of Google in about 15 minutes, main campus of Facebook in 20, 25 minutes. So it's all kind of right here. And so I've grown up sort of surrounded by digital culture, and just by sheer proximity, having lived here for so long, so many of my friends and family, their professions, their careers are in technology, and in digital technology in particular. And so I've just been surrounded by it for a long time, and have always been fascinated by it, and have always taken an interest in technology in general, in digital technology and the internet age in particular. And then I've also been in local church ministry, vocationally, for the last 17, 18 years. And probably about 6 or 7 years ago, I had never thought about it before, but I began to see, not just here locally with the church where I was on staff or other churches in the area, but on a national and even global level, just started to see a lot of churches leveraging digital technology. And I would hear phrases like, maximizing reach, or maximizing impact, those sorts of Christian catchphrases. And so I just started asking the question, like, okay, I think, in some ways that's good, it's helpful, but are there underlying sort of deconstructive mechanisms at play when we leverage digital technologies that might be undoing some of what it actually means to be the church? So about 6, 7 years ago, essentially, I just started becoming really fascinated with the intersection between our ecclesiology and the digital age. And soon enough, I began to see some of that stuff in my own church and asking questions about that. And I took enough of an interest that it turned into a book. So there you go.
Yeah. And so at the time that we're recording this, we're in the days of COVID-19, the pandemic, and your book came out towards the end of March, just a few weeks after the pandemic and lockdown went into effect. And churches all over had to make that shift to digital. And so I would love to know, I'd love to know what's been the reaction to your book, but also what did that whole process feel like, having just released a book about how the church needs to think about digital technology, the analog church? How was that?
Yeah, that's man, it was strange to say the least. When you write a book, it's, for me at least, this book was like a 2-year process, of the ideas coming together, and then writing draft after draft, and all of the editing process. And so we had March 2020 on the calendar as the release date, months and months and months before COVID was ever a reality. So it's not like we were leaning into the irony of releasing a book arguing for in-person embodied ecclesiology at a time when that was not possible. So when we knew that COVID was getting really serious and that we may have to shelter in place, but also knowing that the book launch was on the horizon, my publisher and I, we had some serious conversations about, man, do we need to change course here and figure something out? But ultimately, at the end of the day, for me, I decided, man, if there's anything I would want to say in a time like this, it's this book. And so we released it, right, in the middle of COVID, not even the middle, but right at the beginning. We all started sheltering in place, at least here in my neck of the woods in California, about 2 weeks before my book came out. And in hindsight, I'm really grateful. I don't want to say it was providential or anything, but in some ways it at least feels that way. The response to the book has been really wonderful and encouraging. And I think more than anything, this sort of forced physical separation for many people, it has essentially deepened our awareness of our really human innate need for embodied presence. And so the response to the book has been overwhelming and humbling. And again, hindsight now, 3 months or 8 months after release, I'm so grateful that I was able to share this with the world at a time when the ideas I'm posing aren't necessarily super accessible. But at least the book gives some language to that which we so desperately long for and need in this time. So I'm hopeful that once we are able to gather again safely, we'll have a renewed appreciation for our the availability of embodied presence. So yeah, I'm grateful I was able to release it at this time.
Yeah, I thought it was uh, obviously with all the work that goes into a book. Obviously, you weren't planning for you weren't planning for the pandemic. You weren't planning for all these things. But like you said, what a timely moment for a book like this to be released. I would love to hear you talk. What are some things that churches need to be thinking about when they think about the digital space and the place that they're going to have in it?
Yeah, there was this 20th century philosopher named Marshall McLuhan, who I mentioned in the book, and he was famous for lots of things, but maybe arguably the thing he's most famous for is this little saying he had where he said basically, he was essentially confronting that that old adage that the mediums change but the message stays the same. We've all heard some version of that saying, and Marshall McLuhan famously said, the medium is the message. And what he meant by that is whatever medium or tool we use to communicate whatever particular message we're trying to communicate, by its very nature, affects the content of the message. So we cannot be, we can't create sort of this false dichotomy that we have a particular message that never changes, but we can leverage whatever mediums are at our disposal and think that the message just stays completely the same. It may stay the same to us, those of us who are conveying the message, but what McLuhan was getting at was that whatever mediums we use to communicate a particular message affect how that particular message is received and understood by the recipient or recipients. And so if they're, that's the big picture idea. I think one of the big picture ideas behind the book is if we are sort of thoughtlessly and carelessly leveraging digital technologies to share the message of the gospel, the good news of Jesus, we have to be thoughtful about what sorts of mediums and technologies and tools we are using to communicate the message, because the mediums we use, by and large, affect the content of the message, at least in terms of how the message is received and understood, and most importantly, embodied by those who receive that message. And so that's sort of a big, broad, sweeping idea, but it is one of the most important ideas that we can't just sort of thoughtlessly, recklessly leverage any and every technological tool that we have at our disposal, thinking that it's not going to affect the message or the content of the message, because it will, whether we want it to or not, whether we know it or not. it will. And, we can get more into the details of that if you'd like. But if there's anything I would say to church leaders right now, not just in the digital age, but in any age, be mindful of the tools and technologies you are using to share whatever message it is you're trying to share, because the tools and technologies affect the content of the message.
Yeah. I would love to dive into that. How does the medium affect the message? Because the predominant message from so many church leaders and in the church space is, hey, let's just dive in. Let's just take it all. Let's just jump in all the platforms and be present there. Can you unpack that? Maybe give some examples of how the medium itself affects the message.
Sure. Yeah. Well, one primary example that comes to mind for me is when you think about digital platforms,
Okay.
whether it's social media, like Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or Snapchat or TikTok or whatever, whatever social media platforms are out there. Um, the reality is every single social media platform that exists is primarily a platform in which you exchange information. Or another way to say it is those platforms are designed to be places where content exchange occurs, right? So, and those platforms are limited to that exchange. You cannot do more than exchange content or information on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or whatever. This is one of the reasons why when you get into Twitter, and let's just as an example, we're recording this during election season, and so it's pretty easy. You can go on Twitter and find any number of arguments and counter arguments between different people on Twitter who are arguing their particular socio-political views. And what do those arguments almost always devolve into? They just devolve into shouting matches. One of the reasons for that is because the medium itself is actually not designed for thoughtful, nuanced, generous dialogue or discussion about differing views. They're just not designed for that, which is why arguments on social media almost always devolve into shouting matches, right? Because when you use something that thing is not intended to be used for, it becomes really harmful and destructive. And so the best exchanges on social media are the exchange simply of information or content, data, and whatever else. So a way that applies is if we as church leaders say, well, here's all these social media platforms, let's just leverage those social media platforms to get the message out there. We have to ask the question, what is the message of Christianity? And what is that message intended to do? And is this platform designed to do that? And so I would argue that the message of Christianity ultimately is to witness and follow, commit your life, and then follow the risen Christ, which is not simply information or content. It's actually, the Christian word for it would be discipleship. It's participatory. It's an action, right? It involves our entire lives, our entire beings. And so if you are trying to experience discipleship, a sort of committing of your life to the risen Christ, and then a communal following of that risen Christ with your life, but you're trying to do that on social media, well, it's not going to work because social media is not designed for that sort of whole-bodied participation. It's designed for the exchange of content and information, which is why for so many people and so many Christians, I would say, their understanding of being Christian is basically that they need to get the right information or consume the right Christian content, and they'll be good old Christians, and that's just simply not true. Now, content and information is an critically important part of the journey for sure. So I am not arguing, I'm not a Luddite. I'm not saying get rid of all digital technology. In fact, I have great appreciation for digital technologies and I'm grateful for it, especially in the strange time that we're in now. I just think that digital technologies can be a helpful tool, maybe an initial point of contact and a sort of information or data or content exchange, so to speak, but that exchange has to lead to something much more involved, much more participatory, and I would suggest much more embodied and communal.
Yeah. Is that in your book? You use a phrase. You say digital is a helpful means to a greater incarnation as end. And
Mm-hmm.
is that kind of what you're getting at? That digital can be a place where we start, but it can't be the place where we finish. There has to be some kind of incarnation there. There has to be. You've used the word several times. Embodied. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, that's exactly right. You said it well. Yeah. I think this is an important point to make. Sometimes my book is misunderstood, usually by folks who haven't actually read the book. They think what I'm arguing for is, to be Amish, get rid
Yeah.
of anything technological, anything digital, and churn your own butter and live in communes. Now,
Yeah.
if that's what you want to do, that's great. And that's a beautiful expression of life, but that is not what I'm arguing for.
Yeah.
What I'm arguing for is exactly what you just said, that we need to place not just digital technology, but all technologies, all tools in their rightful place. A hammer in the hands of a skilled carpenter is an incredible tool that can build up beautiful things. But a hammer in the hands of an untrained, misguided individual can do great harm, great damage. And so it is with all tools, including digital tools and digital technologies. And so I just think we need to leverage digital technologies appropriately. And the best way to think about that is exactly what you said. To think about digital technologies as a wonderful initiating space, but not the end itself. We cannot be satisfied as church leaders. We cannot be satisfied with just getting good content out there. If we are, then we are making, in the words of Os Guinness, fat Christians. He has this book where he essentially, talks about the fact that Christians often, we just become incredibly unhealthy, because if you think about how even like your physical body maintains health, you don't just simply consume food, you also exercise and move around. You have to train your body to appropriately, burn the right calories, to keep your metabolism up, to maximize the intake of food, and to make sure that the nutrients go to the right places and not the wrong places. And so it is with following Jesus. If we just sit back, do nothing, and consume Christian content, then, while it might taste good for a little while, our spiritual selves are going to grow increasingly unhealthy. So participation is super necessary, as is information and content, and they need to coexist and serve one another really well.
Yeah. So I would love to dig into that because, Jay, you're a pastor. You're a pastor at Westgate Church in California. That's correct, right?
Yep.
Yeah. And before COVID, what kind of online presence did you guys have?
Yeah, I wasn't on staff here at Westgate before COVID. I was many years ago, and it just returned. But when COVID hit, I was actually on staff at another church called Vintage Faith, where I still I'll go there and teach occasionally and serve as a teacher in residence for them. So I can tell you both. At Vintage, we didn't stream any of our services live. We had a podcast where our Sunday sermons would go live on the podcast every week, as well as a video page where at least the sermons would go up every now and then, select sermons. Here at Westgate, they were streaming weekend services during during the actual time. So it was like a live stream, just a video stream of what was happening in the weekend services. Um, so that was basically the extent of the online presence for Westgate before COVID.
Yeah. And so COVID hit, you had to make a switch to digital. And so help me understand. I love that idea that digital is, kind of an entryway. It's where we're beginning the relationship, but it can't end there. So let's say that I watch the live stream from Westgate. What is the next step after that? Maybe I engage. Do you guys have people in the chat room or somewhere that I can talk to somebody and then they connect? And what's my next step after that?
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you a little bit about what it's like right now during COVID. Obviously, this will change once it is safe for us to gather in person again.
Yeah.
Right now, based on our county mandates, we can do outdoor gatherings, and so we actually are doing that. Not on the weekends, but we've had several prayer and communion services. In fact, we've got prayer services tonight as we're recording this, as well as later this week. So we're trying to do that as much as possible. But for now, in terms of the weekend services, yeah, we always have a handful of pastors who are on the live chat interacting with the folks who are watching. We have Zoom prayer rooms where we invite them to receive prayer, from us and to pray with us if that's something they're looking for. And then obviously there are different connection points, things that we would typically do in person that have all moved to Zoom and online mediums for now. But once we get back in person, once we have in-person weekend services again, I think at least right now our plan is to continue to have online services with pastors online who can engage, but we will be very clear and upfront that if you're watching us online, we're so glad that you are, but that, like we talked about earlier, we will very, very clearly verbalize we believe that this is a great first step into the life of our community, but being a part of our church community involves so much more than just watching a service. We would love to have you join us in person sometime. And then we're constantly promoting, mid-sized groups and small groups where people can really share life with one another. Our church is a fairly large church, and so it's easy to just, walk in and walk out and not talk to anybody. And we really, really do believe that the biblical model for following Jesus is communal in nature, that community is not an option, that it is the very nature by which we follow Jesus, that we do so together. And so we try to invite people into those sorts of experiences and realities as much as we can right now, even during COVID, even though those experiences are mostly on Zoom, but we'll continue to do that and even ramp it up once we're able to gather in person again.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I think you just kind of set up something I was curious about. Even though being on the other side of COVID, the all clear, that could be very far away. Have you given any thought to what that would look like after that? So on the other side, all clear, has there been any conversation about, okay, this is what digital is going to look like when we're completely on the other side?
Yeah. I mean, I think digital as a helpful metaphor for me has been like my house, and I like to think of digital experiences as my front door. My front door is really important. Like even my mother or my mother-in-law, who will come over, both of them will come over to help watch our kids. They're beloved, cherished. We love them so much, right? I can't imagine anyone I'm closer to outside of my immediate family. And when they come to our house, they still come to our front door, just like our mailman or the FedEx delivery guy or the Amazon delivery guy, right? Everyone comes to the front door. And so front door is important. It's crucially important. So we will maintain our front door. We will maintain our digital presence in some form or fashion. What it'll probably look like is our services will be online on the weekend so that you can watch from home. So we will have our front door, but what we will make clear at our front door is that if you are watching, our desire is not that you stay as the mailman or the FedEx delivery guy and just walk to the front door and leave, but rather that you become family. And that's a theological, ecclesiological posture for us. We really, it's hard for us to deny the fact that the New Testament refers to the church as, as followers of Jesus, as brothers and sisters, which we sort of take for granted in the modern age. But really, particularly in the ancient Near Eastern world, the sibling relationship between brothers and sisters who shared the same father, that was the primary relationship. It was considered the most important familial connection you could have, even more so than between parents and children or spouses, right? That your primary familial allegiance in the ancient Near Eastern world was actually between siblings who shared the same father. And so Paul in particular uses that language very intentionally to let us know that as followers of Jesus now, we share the same Father, God himself, who is our heavenly Father, and now we are brothers and sisters. And so we will continue to have our front door, our digital experience, but we will also make very clear, we believe church is family. We believe that being a part of the body of Christ means that we are brothers and sisters. And what that means is it's not enough to simply linger at our front door. We want to invite you into more intimate spaces like the dining table or the living room where we can sit and share life with one another. We believe that that happens in person. So once we're on the far side of COVID, we will make that clear and have a very strong push for those who are watching us online, if they are able to come and be part of us in person whenever it is they can.
Yeah. I love that. I love that image of digital as the front door and constantly inviting people into a deeper experience. One of the things that you bring out quite a bit in your book is that there are things about the church that we actually can't digitize, right? For all of the talk about how accessible digital is, we need to be there. What are some things that are particular to the church? What are some things that require physical presence, if you will, we just cannot duplicate the experience, say with a live stream?
Yeah. Well, I think there's so much, and I cannot duplicate digitally. What we don't mean is like you can't technically duplicate digitally, because just about every in-person experience, technically speaking, you can do online. So technically, you and I could have a meal together online. You bring your food, I bring mine. We sit here and we each eat our own meals while, talking to each other. So technically you can share a meal. But what you and I both know is that for some visceral reason that falls short of the real in-person experience of breaking bread together, sitting at a dining table, sharing the same meal, smelling the same smells, tasting the same tastes. And so that finds its way into just about every human experience. I tell a story in the book of some dear friends of mine who were a part of a church plant that I was a part of several years ago, and newlywed couple in their early 20s, and the wife, and she was 23 or something at the time. She got a horrible cancer diagnosis, cancer of the stomach. And long story short, she battled for several months. And then, one night I get a text message from the husband, and it's like 10 or 11 at night or something. And he says, "Hey, I don't think she's going to make it. I think this is it. She's at home with us. Would you mind coming over and just praying with us and reading some Psalms over her? We don't even know, she was in a coma at the time. We don't even know if she can hear or anything, but would you still come?" And, I could have technically done that over Zoom, right? I could have just said, "Yeah, sure thing, Kirk. Why don't you grab your laptop and I'll just Skype you, because it's, 10, 11 at night. I'm pretty tired. Actually way more convenient, and it's way more comfortable for me. It's way more efficient for sure for me to not change and get in my car and drive 20 minutes to your house and find a parking spot on the street in the dark. It's just, it's way more efficient, way more convenient than doing all of that. So why don't you just open up your laptop and I'll just read some Psalms over Skype. And I could have done that. And technically it would have been the same, but people who are listening to this are like shaking their head like, of course you can't do that. Are you kidding me? Now, if that's all you had, if I was living in Kentucky, where you are, and this was happening in California, then of course I would have done that, because it would not have been possible for me to hop on a flight and get there in time. So I would have done, I would have essentially compromised and done what I could. But if it is at all possible for me to make my way over there, of course I'm going to make my way over there. I mean, even if it wasn't 20 minutes away, if it was 2 hours away, I care about this couple too much to say, well, I'm not going to make that long drive. I would have easily, without hesitation, driven 2 hours, 3 hours that night to try and get there to be with them in person. Why? The reality is, like, I don't really have technical, logistical words, scientific words to describe to you why. But I don't need to describe to you why, because everybody listening viscerally in their body and bones understands why. You know that there are some things in human experience that deserve our embodied presence.
Yeah.
And so we have to ask that question, is like, well, where do we draw that line? You know what I mean? Because the reality is, when you show up to church, like physically show up to church, and you're sitting there and there are other people standing next to you singing the songs or listening to the sermon or whatever, you may not actually know what's happening in their life, but the reality is, chances are there are incredibly painful things that are happening, right? Whether it's guilt and shame from the past, some struggle in the present, or some anxiety or fear about the future. There's stuff that they're wrestling with that deserves our embodied presence, which that takes us much further, right? Now we have to ask questions about, like, okay, how much are we creating space in our churches to be able to have those conversations for people to be able to share, what they're struggling with and wrestling with? And I think that's critically important. But one of the first steps is to make sure that we don't simply acquiesce to the ethos of the digital age that just emphasizes efficiency, and speed over some of the inefficient, inconvenient realities of human experience that deserve our embodied presence. So the list goes on and on. There's so much, but that's one example.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. One of the things that you talk about in the book is how we have a deeper hunger for transcendence than relevance, and the focus a lot of times, especially right now as churches are on digital, is relevance, how easily accessible it is. But you talk about how we are just hardwired, hungry for transcendence. Can you talk about that more? And what are some ways that maybe churches can have transcendence, experience transcendence in their gatherings?
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty nuanced idea. I think the first thing I'll say is that what I'm not trying to say is that being relevant doesn't matter. So what I am not saying is, your sermons and your programs and your approach to ministry shouldn't be relatable to the everyday lives of people. That is not what I'm arguing for. Mm-hmm. What I'm critiquing in that statement is the sort of unabashed, relentless pursuit of cultural relevance, meaning trying to create church experiences and environments that look, sound, and feel exactly like everything else people are experiencing in pop culture. I don't think that that's what people are hungry for. Particularly, actually, and quite quite antithetically to what most of us think, especially young people. Like, so I see so many churches that try to look hip and cool, so that our church looks just like everything else that young people are experiencing in pop culture. And we do that because we fear that if we don't look and sound like all the hip, cool stuff out there, that, you know, young people are never going to show up. And in fact, when we do that, what I've seen is it sort of folds in on itself.
Mm.
I tell a story in the book of a friend of mine who is a DJ. He's an EDM artist, and so he's like the epitome of young, hip, and cool, you know. And he literally travels the world throwing these massive concerts for thousands of people, playing EDM music, you know. And he went to a church one day, and the church, he said, looked and sounded like sort of a tame version of one of his concerts. And what he said to me was, man, I don't think that's what church should be like. So
Mm.
here's a young person who creates those types of environments professionally, and he walks into a church that is so desperate to reach people just like him that they create super relevant spaces. And what he feels is that that's the last thing he's looking for when he walks into a church. And the reason for that is because, without even knowing it, what he's searching for is not relevance. He's not looking for churches that look, sound, and feel like everything else in his life. He's actually taking the risk of stepping foot into a church in search of transcendence, something that transcends the common, the ordinary, the everyday experiences of his pop culture life. You know, he's looking for something he can't find anywhere else. And so, especially in the digital age, I think churches have an incredible opportunity to do that, you know. And I think it's important that we're mindful of that. Now, again, what this doesn't mean is like bring back the choir gowns and sing out of hymnals. Although if that's what your church wants to do, there are beautiful ways to do that. I think very effective ways, in fact. But you know, it does mean asking yourself the question each and every time you do something: why am I doing this? Like, are we doing this because we want to look, sound, and feel like everything else out there in pop culture? Or are we doing this because we really believe this is the most effective way to create um, warm spaces where people can encounter the risen Christ in a genuine way? And I think if we're able to ask that question honestly of ourselves, we will find ourselves slowly over time leaning more and more into creating transcendent spaces and experiences where people who are just exhausted by the relentless pursuit of relevance out there
Mm.
can find some respite and hopefully experience the love of God in transcendent ways.
Yeah, yeah. One of the things I love about your book and just listening to you talk is how you are calling the church uh, to really reflect on this moment that we need. If as we step into these spaces, we need a really robust ecclesiology. We need to have, you know, it needs to be clear in our minds what the church is and is not. Jay, is there anything though, as you look around at this moment? I mean, more and more the conversation is, you know, how can we get more online viewers and increase our market in the digital space? Is there anything that you look at and you just have some fears, some reservations that, you know, as you look around, the church just seems to be diving in more. Any cautions you have or any fears that you have about what you're seeing right now?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't call them fears, definitely some concerns, but also some hope. You know, I think what COVID has done is it's sort of peeled back several layers, and in particular, layers that have to do with our motivations and our aspirations and our intentions, you know. And I think that that has, in general, been a very good thing for the church. And if there's any concern, I would just voice it this way. I think that there might be an underlying fear for so many church leaders today who sense that if they don't keep up with the digital Joneses, they're going to be left behind in the dust.
Oh yeah.
In fact, I read, sometimes Christian articles and Christian leadership journals and magazines that say something along those lines. If you don't get with the digital times, your church is going to die. And I would suggest that that's alarmist, and that there is a reason why there are so many different types of churches. So for leaders who are listening to this, who maybe are feeling some of that fear, like, is our church just going to die? Are we just not going to make it? Here's what I would encourage you with. Be faithful. Don't be fearful.
That's good.
Just be faithful as possible to the community God has called you to serve for however long he's called you to serve them. And certainly be creative, ask the right questions, self-critique. If there's more you can and really prayerfully believe you should be doing, then by all means do that. But do not react out of fear. Don't just move into digital spaces in whatever form or fashion you see because you are afraid that if you don't, you won't make it. Move into those spaces because you feel a real conviction that God is calling you to lead your community that way. And it's all about faithfulness. Just be faithful to who and what God has called you to for however long he calls you to them. And if we can do that, then I believe that God will continue to be, as he always has been, faithful to us. So be faithful, don't be fearful. That's the thing I would say.
Yeah, thank you for that word, because I know so many pastors, church leaders are feeling that pressure that we need to keep up. We need to be more creative. We need to lean in more. Yeah. What do you think the odds are? I've heard some people talk about, Zoom fatigue and other things like that. Do you think that on the other side of COVID, that this could actually, in a lot of ways, create a hunger in people for, like you said, those analog experiences that instead of the new normal being now, everybody's just going to watch church online. This could actually create a hunger for that embodied physical presence on the other side of COVID. Do you think that that's a possibility?
I think it's more than a possibility. Yeah, I'm very hopeful that that's where we're headed. I think we're already seeing some of that. I know there's a lot of data out there, and it's very valid about how churches that have begun to gather in person again are seeing basically anywhere between 25 and 30% of their original attendance come back. And again, there's sort of an alarmist trend, where people are looking at those very early statistics right now and saying, well, the church will never be the same. Every church across America is just going to have way less people. I'm not saying that's not true. That very well may be true. And if it is true, it's opportunistic. That's okay. If churches come back and there just aren't as many people who physically gather in our churches, that's okay. We need to see that as an opportunity for renewal. And, renewal always begins with small seeds. And so I think we need to begin seeing it that way. The other thing I would say, though, is it's early. And the reason, in my estimation, one of the reasons why we're only seeing about a third of people return is because we're still in COVID. I have 2 young kids right now, and most churches that have gone back to in-person gatherings don't have anything for kids because they can't guarantee kids are going to social distance or keep their masks on. And so if you're a young family, you're not going back. Does that mean you're never going back? I mean, maybe for some it does, but for many it does not. I mean, many of the young families I know have not gone back, have not even come to like our prayer services in person here, although many have, but many have not. When I talk to them, they don't say like, no, I'm not a Christian anymore, or no, I don't like our church anymore. What they say is like, no, I'm just waiting. I'm waiting for, either a vaccine or things to lighten up or our numbers to go more down, way down. And that's totally fair. We've got to do whatever it is we can do to serve those families, serve those people really well. But it's early. So, I'm not overly concerned, although I think it's genuine that we very well may have less people on average physically showing up when we get back, even long after COVID, than we did before COVID. And I think that's okay. I think it's an opportunity again for renewal. And so ultimately, I don't know. I don't know what it will be like. Whatever it is like, I believe that God can use whatever new season we are entering into ecclesiologically to plant the seeds of renewal, which, in the words of Mark Sayers, the writer, it is when renewal goes viral that we have revival. So I see nothing but opportunity. And honestly, maybe I'm overly optimistic or something. But I actually think we're at a really exciting time in the life of the church, where God can really use this moment to do some things that otherwise would have been unlikely had we not had to face the reality of a global pandemic.
Yeah. I love it. I love it. Jay, I want to honor your time. And so just a final question. What would you say? So let's pretend we are in the all clear on the other side. What would you say to the person who says, Jay, it's just way easier for me to watch online. Before COVID, I went maybe a couple of times a month. But Jay, it's just really easy for me to get up, be at home. I can watch on my phone. I'm still there, you know. What would you say to that? How would you respond?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing I would say is, maybe you have a good reason to not show up. Maybe it's a physical thing. Maybe it's, maybe your health is compromised and you don't feel safe. So I don't know. I'd have to ask those questions first and honor that. I think those are very valid reasons, which is one of the reasons why at our church we will continue to maintain our front door, maintain our digital presence. But beyond that, if it becomes clear that the person is basically saying, I could show up, I don't really have a problem with it, it's just way easier, way more convenient for me to not show up, then, depending on my relationship with the person, it would dictate how strongly I say this. But essentially, I would ask the question, where did you get it in your head that following Jesus was supposed to be easy and convenient?
Wow.
Because the truth is, when Jesus invites us to follow him, he invites us to follow him to death, to the death of our convenience and ease, to the death of sometimes even our hopes and our dreams, to be reborn into the person God is calling us to be, rather than into the person that we dreamt of being for whatever reason, And so easy and convenient have no place in the equation when it comes to following Jesus. It's about doing the right thing, not the easy thing, doing the best thing, not the most convenient thing. And so I would simply suggest to the person, ask yourself that question. Biblically speaking, study the scriptures and Christian church history. And what do you see there when it comes to what it means to be the church, and be willing to choose the right thing and the best thing rather than the easy or convenient thing.
Yeah. Well, Jay, I have loved our time together. Thank you so much for your willingness to talk today. Jay, for those listening, if they wanted to connect with you further, where could our listeners connect with you at online?
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you so much for this conversation. I've had a blast. Probably the simplest way is just my website. I have a little website where, I have my work there and different things. So it's just jkimthinks.com, jkimthinks.com. And that's my handle on Twitter and Instagram as well. So you can feel free to message me on any of those platforms and be happy to chat with you.
Great. And we'll have links to all of that in the show notes and where people can pick up the book, which I highly recommend that they do. Jay, it's been great. Thanks so much for coming on today.
Oh, man. Thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.